Yes, so I am the author of Zero Waste Living, the 80-20 Way, the busy person's guide to a lighter footprint. And the book just came out last month, so I'm very excited about that. For the structure of the talk tonight, we want to try, Sarah Nell and I agreed, we'll try to keep this as conversational as possible. So please do put your questions in the chat. There are some natural pauses, and I'm going to now queue up the slides. Just give me one moment. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, they look perfect.
Great. So let me start with two facts. First, if food waste were a country, it would be third behind the US and China in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Second fact, by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean. So I was not aware of these two things a couple of years ago. This was me a couple of years ago. I had heard, or I had always been interested in zero waste living, even before I knew there was a term for it, but I had always been a busy person my entire adult life. And I didn't feel I had time to do the things that I knew were right, to recycle more carefully, to buy products for the household that were better for the environment, to reduce my single-use plastic. And in fact, I felt that way while I was leading the climate change efforts at the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank. And it was my job at that time to support governments and private sector clients to get on a more sustainable path, but I was feeling that I didn't have enough time when I came home to do the right things. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to leave the organization after 25 intense years in that career. And I thought that I would take a gap year. I was a bit burnt out. My son was going to be heading off to college the following year. And so I suddenly found myself with time on my hands for the first time for as long as I can remember. And the first thing I decided to do was to try and tackle my carbon and waste footprint. And the first action that I took around that was something kind of silly that I'd been meaning to do for a few years. I had always been bothered, and I'm sure the scene will look familiar to all of you, by all the plastic at the dry cleaners. I'd come home with my clothes, take all the plastic off. I wasn't even putting it in the right place, but that's another matter. And I finally did this thing I wanted to do. I walked into my dry cleaners and I asked if they would put my clothes into my own garment bag instead of in the plastic. And to my surprise, this was not a big deal, and they agreed to do it. And then I looked it up and realized how big a problem plastic was. It contributes about 300 million pounds of plastic in the landfills, just the plastic from dry cleaning. Every year. And so I convinced the owner of the dry cleaners to adopt a kind of reusable bag program. They started offering reusable bags to their customers. I went around town and in my neighborhood and put up signs letting people know about this. And very little time passed before you'd walk in and you'd see the dark green reusable garment bags hanging there amidst the plastic, but much less plastic. And this is the owner of the dry cleaners, Key, at President Valet. And he smiles now whenever he sees me because he says his customers love these bags. So that was great. It felt great, but it got me wondering what else I might do. And it was about this time that a friend of mine introduced me to the concept of zero waste living, this movement to reduce your consumption and reduce your waste. And I really liked it because of the tie-in with climate as well. So obviously, the less you consume, the less you waste, the less is being produced, and therefore less energy, less greenhouse gas emissions. So I was excited to try to go down this path. And these are the authors of the first 2 books I read about zero waste living. And you can see what they have in common. They are both holding their mason jars worth of trash. This represents the trash that their families, in the case of the woman on the left, family of 4, produced in 1 year. So this was exciting, and I was going to try to do this too. They come up with all kinds of recommendations, things like making your own shampoo, making your own household cleaner. That way you avoid some of the toxic chemicals, and you also avoid the plastic that it's packaged in. I do make my own household cleaner now. The woman on the left also has a recipe for making your own paper. So there was a lot there, and I started to feel a bit overwhelmed because I realized I would be going back to work someday, and I wasn't sure how I would fit all these activities into my life. But then I realized that there was a concept from my everyday work life, this idea of the 80-20 rule. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, and some of you haven't, but it's basically the idea that not all actions are equal in terms of the impact that they'll produce, that sometimes you can focus on the most important, the 20% most important things, and that will get you 80% of the way there. We used to say in the business I was in that 80% of our business came from the 20% of the most important clients. The team that I was managing, I used to complain I was spending 80% of my time on 20% of my staff, but you get the idea. So I started wondering whether I could apply this 80-20 concept to the zero waste efforts that I was making. And I came across a book that was really helpful at exactly this time. It's called Drawdown, the Most Comprehensive Plan Ever Proposed to Reverse Global Warming. And in it, the scientists, the authors, have compiled a list of 80 actions that could be taken by governments, by private sector and industry, and by individuals that, if taken, could actually reverse global warming. So I found this really exciting. I poured through the list and looked for the things where the individual could make the biggest difference. And number 1 on the list, refrigerant management, doesn't fit the bill. That's really in the hands of government and industry. Second on the list, wind turbines, unless any of you are wind developers, that's also out of our jurisdiction. But number 3 on the list was really interesting, reduced food waste. And I did a little bit more research and found out that food waste in developed countries like ours at the household level is very significant. In fact, the household level food waste is the biggest contributor to food waste, even ahead of, retail, hotels, farms, losses from transportation from farms to retail centers. So that was really interesting. And 4th on the list, plant-rich diet. Won't surprise a lot of you. It didn't surprise me too much, but it did surprise me that it was that high up on the list. Then going down the list a little further, recycling. Household recycling in particular is number 55 on the list, quite significant. Composting as well. And then single-use plastic. It doesn't specifically fall on the list, but plastics production is very carbon intensive, and the pollutants, the hazardous pollutants that get emitted in the vicinity of these facilities they're very toxic. So I basically settled on 3 areas. I call these in my book the magic 3, and they are focus on food, purge plastics, and recycle right. And my thinking is that what I realized is that if I focused on the easy and impactful, so back to the 80-20 actions, which within those 3 themes, I could know that I was having an important impact, positive impact on my waste footprint. So I wrote the book because I wish that I'd known these things a couple years earlier, and I wanted to help busy people get to 80% of zero waste with very little effort. So I'm going to start with food. And I would say that all of my biggest surprises as I started down this path on zero waste, all my biggest surprises came around the subject of food. And maybe the least surprising was what we mentioned a moment ago about a plant-rich diet. So I think most of us know that plant-rich diet is much less carbon intensive than a meat-rich diet. But I will tell you that at least in my household, both growing up and now, or at least a couple years ago, when I was cooking dinner, no one in the house would consider it was a complete meal if meat were not the centerpiece of the meal. So if I was going to increase and for those of you who are vegetarian, by the way, wow, I'm impressed, and I'm in the spirit of 80-20, I'm trying to meet you part way, and I call myself now a part vegetarian, but I really needed to enhance my repertoire of vegetarian meals. And so I started looking for easy meals that everyone in the house liked. This is one of them. It's only a few ingredients: spaghetti, tomatoes, spinach, and salt and lemon zest. And I think within 20 minutes, every time I make it, it really does only take 20 minutes. I can't believe it, but everybody's happy when I put it on the table. But what I realized was it would be kind of fun to do this with other people. So on the social media accounts that I have, I started this vegetarian cook-along and I would love if any of you would join as well. We all in our separate homes cook a new vegetarian recipe every week, and then we post about it. So that's a lot of fun. And it is really important. And I would say that what I've started to appreciate is that not all food is created equal. It's not meat versus plants. There's a lot of nuance. And so for the book, a friend of mine created this illustration. And this shows for some major categories of food what the carbon impact is of each of the food categories. So for example, at the top, not surprisingly, is beef. 1 kilogram of beef contributes to 60 kilograms of carbon emissions. So again, you may not be surprised by that, but beef is not the same as chicken. If you look at chicken a little ways down, 1 kilogram of chicken is 10 times less than beef. It contributes to 6 kilograms of carbon emissions. So that's a lot better, and that can help you in making some good choices. Halfway down the chart is wild-caught fish. So if I chose salmon, for example, that would be half of chicken, 3 kilograms. And as you might imagine, the vegetables and the fruits fall at the lower end of this table. So this is important. I focus on this a lot as I'm trying to decide what to cook on any given day. So we talked about less surprising is the vegetarian or partial vegetarian aspect. The most surprising aspect for me of the importance of food was around food waste. And I spend in the book quite a bit of time talking about this. In fact, I only give 10 action steps in the whole book that I think need to be taken, and 5 of them revolve around food waste. A friend of mine read the book a few days ago, and she sent me a note saying she loved the strategic partnership that I suggest with your fridge and your freezer. That's not the term I use in the book, but I love that. So let me explain what she means. This is our picture of our fridge on a good day. And what I think has been really helpful for us in reducing our food waste is doing what I call a daily 3-minute fridge review. And this is very simple. It just entails looking at your fridge, moving things around so that they're visible. It helps if you have some clear containers, and then moving forward the things that are going to go bad first. So I even label a shelf "Eat Me First," and that way everyone in the household knows that's what they should aim for when they reach into the fridge. The freezer part of the strategic alliance comes in because sometimes you look at a meal you've had leftovers on a couple of days and you really can't imagine eating it again. If you catch it in time, you can put it in your freezer and enjoy it on a different evening. And one of the things I learned in the course of doing this is how many things are possible to freeze. I had no idea that dairy could be easily frozen. Things like fruit can also be easily frozen. So getting the food waste thing nailed is, I think, really important in this whole exercise. When you've done that, you're going to inevitably still have food waste. Even if we were perfect, we would still have banana peels and apple cores. Well, some people eat apple cores, but most of us don't. So what do you do with that? And then, of course, I came to appreciate the magic of composting. And initially, so this is why composting is so important. And you, many of you may know this already. I did not, but when you put food waste into your garbage and it goes into the landfill, it doesn't benefit from oxygen. There's no oxygen in the landfills, or not enough. So it produces methane instead of carbon dioxide as it decomposes. And methane is a greenhouse gas, which is much, much more dangerous, more potent than carbon dioxide. So the idea with compost, of course, is you save those food scraps and you put them to compost instead, and you avoid the methane. This was so exciting to me, and I wanted to compost, but I was quite shy about the idea of it. So I started off hiring this service, which you may have heard of, called Compost Cab. They weekly come to your house, pick up your 5-gallon container of vegetable, fruit scraps, rice, bread, and they take it away. And for $8 a week, you drastically reduce your garbage, and you feel quite good about it. And this guy was the guy who used to come every week, and he was great. But after a while, I realized this is maybe something I could do on my own. I do have a backyard, and a friend of mine, as a birthday gift, built me a compost bin in my backyard out of old wooden pellets that otherwise would have been thrown away. And so here you see me adding, for those of you who compost, this is elementary, but you've got the greens, which is your food scraps, and the browns, which is things like leaves. So here you see me adding some of the leaves. This has probably been one of the most satisfying things I have done during this last couple of years, is start to compost. But you don't have to compost. You can still send your scraps to a compost bin, and we're very lucky in the DC area. So besides Compost Cab, this paid service I mentioned, there's a similar company called Compost Crew, which operates on a similar business model. There's also one called Veteran Compost. I put all of these in the annex, resource annex. So those are great. But if you don't want to pay for composting, and if you live in DC, we have, and I think in some of the surrounding suburbs as well, in DC, there is a compost drop-off point in every single ward. Usually they're at farmers markets. And even I use them, even though I have my own compost bin. There's some things I'm not very comfortable putting there because of potentially attracting rodents, things like bread or rice, if we don't end up eating them all. So I freeze them or put them in the fridge and bring them down every so often to one of these free drop-off sites in Washington. So that's great. And I could go on and on about composting, but I think this may be a good time to pause before we move on to the plastics part of the presentation. So Saranella, I'm going to turn to you and ask if there are questions we should try to answer now before I go on to plastics.
We have no questions in the chat, but if the audience wants to ask a question, write it now before we move on.
I'll be curious to know when we have the Q&A how many of you compost. Not to guilt you, but just I'm embarrassed to say it was not in my sights at all a couple of years ago.
Right.
So Saranella, should I move on to the next section then?
I have one question that just came in. On your food list, where do beans and legumes fit in? Towards the bottom, I presume?
Yes, that's a great question. And you know, the original diagram, and I'm just going to quickly look in the book. Yeah, so my publisher was concerned that this was too small to read the illustration in the book. And so we left off a couple of items, but legumes and you know, lentils in general are very, very low. I don't want to give you the wrong figure, but I believe it's around, it's less than 1, I believe. I will be happy to look that up and let you know afterwards, but you can feel very good if you have lentils, if lentils feature prominently in your diet.
And ask and you shall receive. The questions are floating in. Catherine would like to know, is it possible to compost meat products with the pickup services? So
that is a great question. And Compost Cab, and I'm pretty sure Compost Crew, do not accept meat. But again, right before the pandemic, I went to a great event called Rooting DC. I don't know if any of you have been to that. And there was a booth that Veteran Compost, which again is in the resources slide at the end. I'm almost positive they said they accept meat as well, meat bones and meat. And I think what they explained, as I recall, was that because their compost system is so much, they use heat, much higher temperatures that allow them therefore to deal with the meat and meat products. So that's meat is not something I currently compost. I actually thought of switching over to Veteran Compost for exactly that reason, because I'm not yet a vegetarian. And at about that time, as I said, my friends surprised me with the compost bin. So I'm at the moment not composting meat. There are systems that allow you to compost meat at home. I was just a couple of hours ago, I saw someone posted about one of these systems on Instagram where you can put the meat bones right in. I don't know too much about those, but I know they're out there.
So we have a lot of people that do compost and have been doing so for a number of years. Some comments include that compost, Veteran Compost, I think, it does accept meat products. One of our attendees says that she's conflicted about seafood. She prefers wild caught, but concerned about sustainable fishing practices. So what are your thoughts about it?
My thought is, it's kind of an 80-20 answer. I would like to be a vegetarian. I am just not there yet. If all I care about is carbon, which is not all I care about, then you can see, again, I'll go back to that slide. You can see where wild caught fish is on there, and farmed, as you can see, is a little higher up. So it's a greater carbon footprint than wild caught. Sustainable fishing and sustainable farming of fish is a real issue. And so I'm not, because I cannot suggest what I don't do myself. I do not, I still eat meat and I still eat fish, but I think looking for the sustainability label on fish is important because it is becoming a very big issue and one we should all be more aware of. So I appreciate your asking the question.
Can you compost coffee grounds?
Yes, yes, that was a big surprise to me. Compost coffee grounds are I think they're considered the browns, not because of the color, but and the composting experts out there can correct me if I've got that wrong, but I think the coffee grounds are considered not the greens in the mix, but the browns in the mix, and they are very compostable. And I add my coffee grinds into the compost bin every single morning. So yeah, that's a great one. There are some surprising things that can be composted. You know, fingernails, toenail clippings, hair, you know, anything organic basically can be composted. You should not put, and I do talk about this in the book, we have 2 dogs, you should not put the dog poop in the compost bin. There are separate systems. I don't have one yet, but there are separate systems for that. But because of the parasites and the bacteria, that should not be placed in your compost bin unless you have the proper system for it.
So I'm gonna quickly lump a couple comments together. So Azaleas love coffee grounds. Compost Crew is taking meat nowadays. And there are a lot of people that are very excited about composting and ways that they do. So after the presentation today, I will make the chat box available to you so that you can read all of their comments. Can dog hair be composted?
Yes. I mean, let me say, my understanding is dog hair can be composted. I do not add dog hair to our bin. I mean, obviously, like human hair, it's organic, it's compostable. Are there issues with dog hair from a contamination point of view? Not that I'm aware of, so I assume they can be composted. Again, I don't put the dog hair in the compost, but we have non-shedding dogs, so maybe that's why it's not a big issue for us.
And I will close this question section with a comment from Diane that she believes all the companies that we have mentioned for composting take the compostable waste to the Prince George's Organics Waste Facility, which is an amazing place to visit. And ANS takes students there on field trips so they can understand the impact of solid waste. And with that, all further questions will be taken on the next question break. Thank you, Stephanie.
That's great. Thank you. And I've made a note. I would love to sign up for one of those field trips. That sounds great. Well, you'll hear in a minute about my field trips. So the next of the magic 3 is what I call purge plastics. Whereas in the food section of the book, I talk about quite a few steps that I recommend, I only have one action step in this section that I suggest, and that is to pick one thing. What do I mean? I, from my own experience, am convinced that when you start to pay attention to how much plastic, single-use plastic, is around us, it opens your eyes and you start to look for ways to reduce what your contribution to the disposal of single-use plastics. So for me, the thing I picked, and when I say picked, I thought of something that I use all the time, that I was using all the time. I made a commitment that I would never buy it again. And I found alternatives. So in my case, it was the plastic water bottle. And I shudder to think, when I was going to the office every day, I like to drink water. I would buy a lot of water bottles. I would go through quite a few every week. I would drink from the water fountain, but if I was in a meeting, I always wanted to carry a water bottle with me. So the commitment I made was to never again buy my water from a plastic bottle. And so instead, I bought my stainless steel plastic water bottle. And what this means is whenever I leave the house, if I think I'm going to be gone for a while, I have to remember to bring it with me. Otherwise, I will be thirsty, since I made this commitment. For other people, it's the Starbucks coffee mugs. You may think they're made of cardboard, but they're lined with plastic. Only 11% of recycling facilities in the US can actually accept those for recycling. So you can decide not to ever use a Starbucks disposable cup, and you can bring your own Starbucks cup. That's a little more difficult now during COVID, but I think most of us anyway are drinking our coffee at home during COVID. Not all of us, but some of us. So I think when it comes to plastic, we are in a convenience culture. It is set up, this culture that we're in, consumer products companies make it so easy for us that it is really hard. I don't want to pretend that it's easy to get rid of the single plastics in your life, nor do I say in the book that I do, but I've gone a long way. And so I really suggest, and you don't have to write it in the chat box, but you might want to think about what's that one thing that, if you don't already do this, what would it be for you? Something that you use all the time, that comes in a container that you spend seconds or minutes with, and then you toss in the garbage. I want to just give you a couple of examples, other examples. I decided not to use paper towels anymore. That they almost always come in a plastic wrap, as you know. And so instead, you can see the slide, and you can see my 3D version of the same thing. This is my non-paper towel system. These are washcloths that we use in the house like paper towels. We wipe off the counter, and then we throw them in a bin under the sink. And then when it's time to wash our towels, we add these to the mix. This means we're not using paper towels, which are also disposable. Those are not plastic, but they're not recyclable. They are compostable, but they're not recyclable. Sorry, this is my show and tell portion of the evening. The other thing I started doing is we started bringing cotton produce bags to the grocery store. And we use these instead of the plastic bags in the store. And that's another source. We just don't have that plastic in our lives anymore. And here's another example. A friend of mine told me, and for those of you who live around here, many of you probably use South Mountain Creamery. This is a company that operates like the old-fashioned milk delivery man. And the nice thing about them, besides the fresh local milk, is that they deliver the milk in glass bottles the way it used to be done. And you pay a deposit, and then you put your milk bottles in the white bin. And these are the dogs, by the way. And then you that don't shed. And then it's picked up the following week when your milk is delivered. So if you're intent on reducing your single-use plastic, I would say it's not always easy, but it's doable. And I'll just share one more example of looking for companies that are trying to support you in this effort rather than trying to undo you in this effort. And this is one of my favorite examples, this company called Loop that was established a couple of years ago. Their service is a bit like the one I just described. It's a delivery service. They also are starting to carry products in stores, but right now it's a delivery service. It's now available across all the contiguous United States. Same thing. What they've done, though, is worked with consumer products companies to create packaging that is reusable. So, for example, I told you earlier about shampoo. I don't make my own shampoo, but they have partnered with the maker of Pantene, and now they sell Pantene shampoo and conditioner in these reusable stainless steel containers, which, I use up the shampoo. When it's empty, I put it in this tote. When the tote is pretty full, they come and pick it up, and they clean that container out, refill it, and then send out the product to the next customer. So we've been able to get rid of quite a bit of our plastic packaging by using loop. So that brings me to the end of the plastics part of the talk. And before I move on to recycling, are there any questions on plastics that I can try to answer?
Oh, you know it. So we have the first question with regards to plastic comes from Jessica. How do we get Costco or other stores to stop selling plastic water bottles? It's rage inducing.
I'm going to talk about this a little more in the last section, how to influence as a consumer, but let me just go ahead and say now. I think one of the things I've realized very clearly is how much power we have as a consumer. Now, you probably will not get Costco to stop selling water in bottles because there's demand for it. But you can start to let Costco know that you care about this. I think when enough of us raise a fuss about it, then the companies don't want to lose you as a customer, and they will start to look for other solutions. I mean, if you go back to this loop example, why do you think Procter & Gamble and Nestle and Haagen-Dazs are working with loop? It's not because I don't want to sound cynical, but it's because their customers are demanding that they come up with more sustainable packaging solutions. So it has moved a whole bunch of companies in a certain direction that they were not open to a couple of years ago. I really believe if we raise our voices politely, but if we put it out there that we care about this subject, if enough of us do this, there will be other options. I really strongly believe that.
Karen would like to say that in some households, there's a lot of berries that are consumed. I certainly suffer from these myself. And we can't avoid purchasing them in the plastic containers. Is there a way that as consumers, we can do something about that?
So if you read my book, you'll be slightly amused at my comment about raspberry containers. And I won't give away the story, but my fiance is on the call right now, and it has to do with him and his addiction to raspberries and my problem with plastic, and we clash a little bit on this. But let me try to answer your question. If you make a real commitment that you do not want to buy things in plastic, there will be some things you will have to do without. Raspberries is not one of those things this household apparently is willing to do without. But you will, I didn't think that I was open to this. I would go to the store and whatever, in the old days, whatever I was in the mood to buy, whatever looked good, that's what I bought. It didn't matter what packaging it came in. Now, when I go to the vegetable section of Safeway or Whole Foods, I will only buy the fruits and vegetables, except for raspberries, that are not packaged. And that limits my options. It means I'm not buying the oranges that I love that come in that plastic netting. I'm instead buying those small oranges, but they're so delicious this year. I can't remember what they're called. They're not clementines. Yeah, anyway, so it limits your options. But there's another solution. It's not if you don't have time, but it's one that I was committed to trying, and that is that in season, there are, of course, raspberries in this area. And so one thing you can do, and I have done this, is you can freeze raspberries in season and then put them in your freezer and enjoy them other times of year. Now, if you eat raspberries every day, as we do in this household, you're probably not going to be able to pick, because you can go to farms and pick them yourself, or get them sometimes in those punnets, the cardboard containers. You're probably not going to be able to pick enough raspberries to make it through the whole year. But those are the sorts of things that I think you start to think about when you've put the lens on of, gosh, there's an awful lot of single-use plastic that I'm responsible for buying and then disposing of. So not a simple question and not a simple answer, but there are some options.
Thank you. I would like to close this section in the interest of time with this last question from Beth. How about all the takeout food containers?
I am going to get to that in the next section. So with your permission, I'll go ahead into the next section. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I want to just clarify for the audience that we are just allowing the rest of the presentation to go through, and we are going to tackle all your remaining questions at the end. So whoever needs to leave at 8 can do so without missing any content. Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Serenella. So recycling. So you know the waste hierarchy, there's reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle's not as good as reduce and reuse, but it is really important that we get it right because, well, for lots of reasons. We use less natural resources when we can recycle metals and paper and glass into new products. So it's important to get this right. This is how I spent some of the free time I suddenly found I had. I was visiting, as I said, all of the regional MRFs, they're called material recycling facilities in the area that were open to the public. And this is the one I think it's Montgomery County, or maybe this is the Prince George's County one, but this is what they do. They take your blue bin, they dump it in the truck, and then they dump it at the site, and their job there is actually not to recycle, it's to sort for recycling. And this is how they sort it into these bales of paper, cardboard, metals, and plastic. And I'm not suggesting from an 80-20 perspective, if you're busy, you don't probably want to do this field trip, but it is fun and it's interesting and you learn a lot. I learned that metal and glass are infinitely recyclable. Paper is not, because the fibers get shorter and shorter every time you recycle them. Plastic is recyclable 2 or 3 times maximum. So my one recommendation on recycling, it's a bit like the plastics one, I only have one, is that you do a recycle audit. That sounds big, it sounds boring, and it sounds complicated. It's really not, it's kind of fun actually. I did one this week for someone. This is one I did a while ago for a neighbor who has a lot of recycling. And in the interest of time, I'm going to breeze through this fairly quickly, and I can talk about recycling like composting all day long, but I want to give you a sense of what the purpose of it is. What you do is you, once a week, ideally the day before your recycling gets picked up, you put all of the things in your recycling bin on a tarp or on a big towel, and you sort them by approximately those same materials that we saw in the last slide, into metals, plastic, paper and cardboard, and glass. And what you're trying to do through the audit is, I would say, 2 things. One is to make sure you're doing it right, to make sure you're actually putting into the bin what can be recycled and that you're not wish cycling, which is a very well, it can be damaging and it can be very inefficient at the least. So that's your first goal. And your second goal is that, like anything that you measure, you start to get a sense of it and you start to get a sense of what you can do with it. So I would say, by doing this, you start to discover some things that you maybe there may be potential to reduce, meaning not the product that you buy necessarily, but the choice that you make in what the packaging is. So let me give you an example. My neighbor here, they go through a ton of yogurt, and she realized this from when we were doing this audit. And she sort of took a mental note of it, and she's very busy. But when the pandemic hit, she suddenly found she had time on her hands, and she started making her own yogurt. So she no longer has that whole waste stream that she's contributing to. The important thing to do is to check your rules for your jurisdiction. It's different if you're in DC, Prince George's County, Arlington, even Chevy Chase Village is different from Montgomery County that it's in. So you need to know your rules. They're not vastly different, but there can be nuanced differences, like whether you're allowed to leave the cap on the bottle or not. I want to get to this question that was just asked about the takeout container. So here is a takeout container. Most people don't know, and I didn't know until recently, the black part on the bottom is not recyclable. Why? Even though it may have a little number and a triangle on the bottom, it is there's an infrared or ultraviolet actually system that's used at these sorting centers, and it can't see black. So this ends up in the trash. So you need to just go ahead and put in the trash. The top part is recyclable. So then the person asked the question, is there an alternative to this? And the answer is yes, there is. And here is a slide that shows you the alternative. Our favorite Chinese restaurant, City Lights of China, lets us bring our own stainless steel containers. So this is takeout, and we place the order by phone. We go to City Lights about 5 minutes before it's going to be ready. We give them our containers. 5 minutes later, they put the food in our containers, and we take it home without any plastic. So that's the answer to your question. And I think, because we don't have time, but I would just say this is why the audit's important. If you know what you're trying to solve, you can find a solution. Almost always there's a better solution than the packaging that ends up in the recycling bin. Okay, now I would like to move to the last section in the time we have left, and I'll breeze through this. When you make the commitments and you make the changes in your life, you will then start to look around and notice that other people in your life are not necessarily doing the same things that you are. And I think one of the most hopeful things that I found as I was doing this work and doing this research for the book is that you can and you do have a huge influence beyond your own footprint. And let me tell you why. The concept of social norms is really powerful. So all of you have been in a hotel where you've had the sign listing that if you want to be green, please reuse your towel. Well, there was a study done at Arizona State University by a professor that gave two different groups. One had the green, do the right thing sign, and the other one had that sign, but also said that the majority of guests that had stayed in the hotel had chosen to reuse their towel. Well, guess what? 26% more in the second category chose to reuse, to hang up their towel. And this is because we are social animals and we want to do what we think everybody else thinks we should do. So that means there's a lot of hope that you can be a role model for everyone else in your community, in the people that, whether it's on social media. Let me move to that. I have an Instagram and a Facebook account, and as I said, I post about my vegetarian recipes. I also post about the latest way. I think today I posted about a good place where you can send things that you think don't have another home. There are these sites, some of you I'm sure have seen, Trash Nothing or Nextdoor, where you can get rid of things that other people may want. So social media is a great outlet for getting the word out. I think it's also really important, we talked about, as a consumer, you have an enormous amount of power. Companies do care what you think, so support the right companies. I talked about a couple of them earlier. I'll just mention one last one. This is a startup called Plastic Tree. This is the owner of Plastic Tree, Lara, and she basically accepts, again, reduce, reuse, recycle. She accepts things for reuse. She finds a new home for egg cartons, you can see in when she picked up from me, for cardboard boxes, even beer, glass beer bottles. She's cooperating with local breweries. So this is a bit like Compost Cab. There's an $8 a week charge, and then she'll take anything that will fit in that 20-pound bin that you see, the green bin. And I want to end with a quote from my favorite zero waste blogger, Anne-Marie Bonneau. She goes by the Zero Waste Chef. And she says, "We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly." And I think that speaks perfectly to what I've been trying to say and what I try to say in this book. So I want to leave time for more questions. I know we just have a few minutes left. I do have at the end, you will get the slides. I included a resource slide, which might be helpful on ideas for where you can shop that's involves less packaging, where you can find some of the flyers on recycling in your jurisdiction and so forth. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So let me go back. Can white bleach paper towels be composted?
The answer is yes, they can. You know, what you want to be thinking about is when you get into things like a lot of ink on paper, I'm less comfortable putting heavily colored ink because of the chemicals into my composting bin, but white paper is fine. In fact, let me tell you one other recycling hint. Shredded paper cannot be put in the blue recycling bin. The fibers are too short and it will, again, mess up the machinery. I didn't know that before, but shredded paper can be put into the compost bin. So when we do need to shred things, that's what I do. And that's like your paper towel question.
Simone Barkley recommends going to the farmer's market whenever possible to reduce the amount of plastics.
Absolutely. I do it every Saturday. And thank you for mentioning that. And I forgot to, I should have, but that is a great source, obviously, of local produce. They often do package things, but they know me, so they know that I will bring my own container. I sometimes pre-order so that it doesn't, they don't end up putting it in the plastic container. But yeah, farmers markets for so many reasons, not to mention, you know, supporting your local economy are great sources of produce, plastic-free produce.
Thank you. And then Diane would like to share that one of her pet peeves is the massive waste of graduation gowns, which are plastic and used only for 1 hour. Have you done any research on this?
That is a great question. My son just graduated in the spring from high school, and we had a little private ceremony for him since all the schools were closed, and he wore his gown. And then I wanted to return it to the school, and they said, no, we don't take them back. So I don't know if that's just a COVID thing, but I completely agree with you. It is crazy that they produce those every year. I would love to to partner with some schools and see if there's a different way they could do that. I mean, these are the sorts of things where if you have extra time, these are great initiatives to take on, because I think for a lot of it, it's a bit like the dry cleaning story. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that people aren't used to thinking about it. So when you give them an alternative, they take it up.
Are there any markets for all the recyclables to do something with them?
So yes and no. So yes, for some items are hugely in demand. Some items used to be sent to China until China closed up its recycling, allowing us to dump our recycling products there. So as I mentioned when I talked about metals, cans of food, any metal is a very lucrative waste stream for those recycling facilities. Glass is a very difficult product in this area. Arlington County accepts glass, not in the blue recycling bin, but for those of you who live in Arlington, they have separate purple bins for those, and those are used for asphalt for roads and other construction. The problem with in Europe, glass is highly recycled, but in the US it's a problem because you need to have a glass manufacturing facility, and if there isn't one near the place where you're disposing of the glass, then glass is so heavy it's not economic to transport it to the place that needs it. So the answer to your question is, unfortunately, there are really good markets for some waste streams and less good for others. But here's the thing where you have a role to, we as individuals have a role to play. We need to be demanding more products with recycled content. The more we demand those products, the more the manufacturers will look to those waste streams to use them for their manufacturing. That's really key.
I have a couple questions, a couple comments about the disposable masks and everything, this new wave of materials that is related to the pandemic. Can you tell us a bit about what you've learned about those?
Yes. So the pandemic is causing a whole lot of issues besides COVID in terms of plastics. I think the plastics industry has taken advantage of this period a bit where everybody is so concerned about spreading germs, spreading the virus. So let me first talk about masks. If at all possible, we should be wearing reusable masks, right? I mean, it's every time I take a walk, even in my neighborhood, I see masks on the ground. It's become a terrible problem. There is a company called TerraCycle, which if you pay them, you can collect a bunch of things like face masks and send it to them, and they will recycle. They recycle hard to recycle products. But I will tell you, the mask thing is a big issue, and the plastics. You know, I was dropping my son off at college, and I handed my water bottle to the university bookstore guy, and I said, "Could you just fill this in your sink?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not allowed to do that. I can only sell you. I'm not allowed to touch your, bottle." But he could take from me all the other products that I was pushing over so that he could ring them up. So there isn't a lot of sense to it. I think the specialists came out. I mean, there were 125 scientists and people in the medical profession, doctors, who came out with a statement when they realized how bad COVID was contributing to the plastics problem, to say that there really is no difference between plastic and other materials. The key thing is hygiene. You have to wash your hands before you touch anything and after you touch something. So my view on that is COVID is creating a really big issue on single-use plastic. Please spread the word. Give your friends reusable masks if they don't have any. It really helps a lot.
Thank you. Do you know where we can recycle clothing that is torn or stained and running shoes that are shot?
So it's very funny you asked this. I was just looking at my book to see what I'd said about this, because I cleaned out my garage. We cleaned out our garage last weekend, and we came up with clothes that we were ready to give away. Some we actually gave to the charity A Wider Circle those are clothes in good condition. But your question is about torn clothes. So clothes, cotton clothes, can be composted. There are also stores, retail outlets that will take back textiles. And there is it's called Earth 911 Recycle Locator. You can type in that and look up the material you're trying to dispose of and what your geography is, and it will tell you the areas. So today, I just happened to look this up. There is a store, the North Face in Bethesda, that apparently takes torn fabrics. So I will be checking that out in the next week, because as I said, in our garage cleanup, we found quite a few of these. I don't know about sneakers, but I will look into that. Great questions.
Organic market takes running shoes and other pieces of clothing, so check them out. Usually they have the bin right at the entrance of the store. And Jessica would like also to contribute that Silver Creek Middle School in Kensington has a drop box near the dumpsters to drop running shoes, purses, and non-donate worthy clothes.
That is great.
The school will get a donation per pound.
Oh, that's great. That's great. The key with a lot of these places that do collections is to try to figure out whether they actually do something with, especially the things that are reusable. Do they try to find new homes for this? Because that's the better solution than recycling. But torn clothes, I don't think we should be giving those to charity. If they're in really bad shape, we should be trying to dispose of them properly.
Thank you. So that is the end of what we have in the chat. If you have a burning question that you haven't been able to ask up to now, I invite you to either write it in the chat or unmute yourselves to ask it directly to Stephanie.
Thank you.
There were a lot of compliments to you in the chat from earlier.
Thank you.
In such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. So if
thank you so much.
Everything.
You all asked such fantastic questions, and I've written them down so I can remember them. And for a couple of them, I will do my research so I can figure out the answers. But thank you all so much. It's really a pleasure to join you. And thank you for taking time quite late in the evening. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Serenella, for your great facilitation.
No, it's a pleasure. This was an amazing presentation, and it was very informative.